Hello, welcome to Staring Down the Storm, Autism Advocacy in America. I'm your host, Tabitha Ziegler. All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. We're here with John Dickerson and Kathy Davis. It's going to be a really exciting day today. They are covering everything from the history of Indiana and institutionalization. They're going to inform us about a little bit about the past, present, and future. So, John, would you like to start?
Tabitha, thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm just deeply honored. Thank you for your work on the podcast and your work in advocacy, because it is so important, probably as important today at any time in this month, March, my 52nd year in the field. I finally figured out one day, but I don't think I'm ever going to. It changes too fast. But what you're doing is so incredibly important, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you for coming.
And for joining us. So I started with the ARC in 1973, which was then called the Association for Retarded Children, and it's how we referred to people at the time. And it was my very first day on the job. I went to a meeting, and my boss said, act like you belong at the table, but you appreciate the opportunity to be there. Mm-hmm. I knew nothing about it. I went to college to play football, teach high school.
Well, where'd you play football at?
Little small school that doesn't even exist anymore in South Dakota. But that first meeting was about writing the very first rules for mandatory special education, which didn't go into effect until 1975. So before that time, kids with disabilities did not have the right to go to school with their brothers and sisters. It was up to a local school district to decide, Kathy's kids can go, your kids can't. Mm-hmm. And they didn't even tell you about what was available for you. So we had all these people who were trying to figure out what those rules were. Fast forward today, we have more kids in schools than ever before, more kids getting jobs as they leave school, and they have a better plan for their life. Long way to go. But we're fortunate along the way, and I'm going to turn it over to Kathy, because in my years of advocacy, we work with some extraordinary government leaders. And Kathy, I first met as a budget director, and then as a secretary of FSSA, and then later as lieutenant governor. And one of the most extraordinary leaders, along with Governor Frank O'Bannon, that set a policy for Indiana. So we talk about our history of institutionalization and deinstitutionalization in a role as secretary of FSSA. So, Kathy, good to be with you.
John, always good to be with you. Dear friend, and Tabitha, I thank you as well. This is a real opportunity to go back to some extraordinary times. And as John mentioned, in 1997, I was the Secretary of the Family and Social Services Administration, having been appointed by new Governor Frank O'Bannon. And it happened to be the moment at which we had a crisis at Newcastle State Developmental Center, which sent us looking at how we were serving people with developmental disabilities and finding a pretty sobering picture and using the crisis as an opportunity to start some pretty major change very quickly. Indiana was the most industrialized state to close all of its state institutions for people with developmental disabilities, the first one. And so we can certainly talk more about how that all developed and what that experience was. But it's probably the most profound experience of my career. I was trained originally in mechanical engineering. I was a control system engineer. I went to business school. I came to Indiana from Massachusetts to work at Cummins Engine Company, where all sorts of change was being made to make engines better and cheaper. But then got the opportunity to join state government and sort of apply the same, how do you design an organization to get the results that you're after? Right. An organizational that is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. What do we want that to be, and then what do we need to do in order to make that happen? And in government, you have the opportunity when that works, it's working for the lives of people. And empowering people, I think, is it's our greatest strength. So I'm glad that we're going to spend some time exploring that today.
Well, would you guys like to talk a little bit more about it seems like it would be very important to have firsthand knowledge. You cannot deviate from what you see with your eyes. As we're seeing right now, there's a lot of things going on that people are seeing that is affecting them in a certain kind of way. You were there for a lot of this stuff that was going on in the institutions. Would you guys like to speak a little bit more in depth about that?
For a lot of years. So we have to remember the first services that were built in this country for people with disabilities in the late 1800s were institutionalized. Mm-hmm. So the idea that we had to put people somewhere that they could get the services that they need. And so we had all that time, and the phenomenon that happened is really interesting. So in World War II, now I'm ancient, but I wasn't born until 52, so I'm telling this from other people's experience. But the ARC, which now doesn't stand for anything, it's just the ARC, mm-hmm. but was formed in the late 50s, late 40s, or early 50s. Uh-huh. And if you recall our history, more women came out of my home and went to work because the men were overseas. Mm-hmm. They were fighting. They were in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. Thank you, Fenlo, for their service. But once women got out there, and then they had children with disabilities, mm-hmm. they quit accepting that the only option was sending them 3 hours away. Mm-hmm. It was that time we started the first movement to create schools. Bloomington, Indiana claims they had the first school created by families. Mm-hmm. Other places would argue with that. Indianapolis claims it, whoever. Mm-hmm. But the idea that power among those moms that went to work, they said, we're rejecting this. And there was no funding, there was no legal authority, but that model started slowly shifting. And then in the 60s, we started building it up and began thinking about what do we need to do with this. And we started the first group homes for people to live. No funding for it. County government came involved and got started, but it was that emphasis from the families. And we found ourselves in the late 90s, having gone through the recession early in the 90s, but with this incredible event happen where this brave young woman who paid an incredible personal price saw things going on in a Newcastle State Developmental Center and said, I can't stand this, called the state police.
Mm-hmm. Good for her.
Said, I see people being beaten, screamed at, yelled at, hurt, punished in ways that no human being should be. And so state police hooked her up with a camera to show it, mm-hmm. and it ended up going on the news.
Dan Rather.
Yeah.
Big time.
Love Dan Rather.
Big time.
And I remember there was this pivotal moment where Kathy and I were called in to speak with Governor O'Bannon, mm-hmm. and one of the greatest leaders Indiana's had. And he looked at us and said, can this be fixed? And my shy retiring self, I said, no, we can't. The culture is so bad, we can't be fixing it. Mm-hmm. We've got to change it, and can we do better? Yes. And so we started on this path and gave people remarkable choices. We had this carefully planned meeting with families, and somebody leaked it as we were driving over there. So 400 people were in this gym, angry families, staff, whatever, that the facility was going to close. And Kathy stayed, I think we stayed there 4 hours till the last family would leave. She stayed and listened to anybody that wanted to stay and talk.
Yeah.
And I remember this one dad came up to me, and I'm a big guy. He was about 5'3", ex-Marine. He says, I want to take you out in the parking lot. I'm going to kick your ass.
Yeah.
And I said, no, you aren't, because I'm not going out in the parking lot with you, because I think you would. And his son, Robert, he said, nobody would. They came all the way from Lafayette. Mm-hmm. And I said, if you work with us, we'll figure this out. We'll figure out what to do with Robert. Robert ended up being able to move back to Lafayette mm-hmm. with 2 other guys. And he lived blocks away from his parents, mm-hmm. where they could go walk in the evening for ice cream. Mm-hmm. Robert was a guy that we got to know that he carried a bunch of action figures around him mm-hmm. everywhere he went. And the staff said, oh, he's obsessed with these action figures. He wasn't obsessed, he was worried about people stealing them. Mm-hmm. When he got his own place, he never carried them around it again, because nobody ever stole it from him. Mm-hmm. Or the fellow that you talked about earlier, that he'd never spoken. And after he got the chance to get out,
In 3 weeks.
3 weeks he's talking.
3 weeks. So I was in my new job as FSSA secretary, having had responsibilities for leading other organizations, but no experience in human services. And this staff member was on film holding a clipboard over the head of one of the residents saying, "You stand up again, I'm just in the mood to hurt you bad." And that was on national news. And it was immediately before the facility was going to have its annual Department of Health survey. And several staff members quit in the moment. We failed our Department of Health survey. And then the Department of Justice came in to take a look at Newcastle State Developmental Center. So people had a shared living area of 8 of them. 2 people shared a bedroom, so 4 bedrooms. Sharing a bedroom with somebody that you didn't choose to share a bedroom with, living with 7 other people that you didn't choose to live with, and the rules having constraints based on the person who needed the most constraint, which pretty much meant every door was locked. And so even people who would have had plenty of ability to roam and enjoy the space couldn't, because the doors were locked. And if there was, a difficult behavior, then, everybody was coping with it as best they could, but in very, very close quarters. So the Department of Justice came in and painted a very sobering picture of what it was like to live at Newcastle State Developmental Center for all those reasons. And we were given, somebody suggested, I don't know if it was you or where we got the idea, that we could contact CMS, the federal Medicaid agency, and negotiate with them that if we closed Newcastle and provided everybody with a process of real person-centered planning where we would get to know them and they would have choices about where to live and who to live with, that we could continue our Medicaid funding, because that was 2/3 of the money that was used to run Newcastle State Developmental Center. And if we failed our health survey and CMS could end that funding, and that would have really put the state in a bind. So they agreed to that. And in 1 year, and the other sort of, John and his colleague Costa Miller, who ran the Association of Rehab Facilities, were just full of information about what the alternatives would look like. And within 3 weeks, we had how many providers? 30 providers or more in the gymnasium talking to families about what the alternatives were close to their home. And we did it, and 164 Newcastle residents moved into independent living with somebody they chose to live with, and had tremendous results once they had freedom and choice back into their lives. It was marvelous, and and these days it's such a reminder of what we can accomplish when we truly work together. We know what we want to get done. We're being very honest with each other about how it's going and what we need to do it better. But we did do that in a year, and achieved exactly the results that we were after. And everybody worked hard at it, but felt such a great reward from it.
The nice thing that Tabitha was come out of it is we didn't just close one facility. We started looking at the whole system. When I first met Kathy, I thought, oh my gosh, an engineer. What does she know? And a budget director on top of that. What on earth are we going to do? But she understood it was a machine. And you build, I remember you may not remember this, but one of our first meetings, you said, in any manufacturing process, you have to plan for quality, not measure it at the end. Human services, well, he's measured on the end, and whether he's screwed up or not. So we started looking at what we learned was Newcastle, and said, the next thing we knew, there was this task force that's created that Kathy chaired. She didn't hand it off to somebody else. She chaired it, said, we had to redesign this whole system. And we're not stopping with Newcastle, we're going to move on. Because we had 4 other institutions at the time. And started building a plan on how do we restructure this funding, because at that time, now again, think about this in today's dollars, 1997, true cost of operating Newcastle was around $1,000 a day. And what we got was terrible. And because Governor O'Bannon was also very committed to, we had some bad employees in the state, but we had some really good people. And he said, we're going to take the good people and we're going to fight the jobs. Didn't forget the staff, didn't brush them all with the same paintbrush and say, you're all terrible people, because we had some very caring folks.
Sure.
But then said, how do we change that whole system to where it laid the foundation that the next administrations kept that going? To this day, back in 97, we had about somewhere around 1,000 people in community living, all across the whole state, maybe 1,000 people. When I first came here in 83, the legislature approved 54 new group home beds. 54. Not 54 homes, 54 beds across the state. And that was where we're at. Today, we have nearly 50,000 people getting Medicaid waiver services, community living supports across the state of Indiana. We often compare ourselves to Maryland, much richer state, and we have more people receiving services with IDD than the state of Maryland. And so we've grown tremendously, and it started from that moment when we said there's got to be a better idea. And we were fortunate to have Governor O'Bannon and Kathy and some folks that brought everybody together and said, how do we use the money more wisely? How do we put families in control? So for example, when a family has control of their waiver, they can pick provider A, B, C, D, pull them all together and do what they feel is needed, as opposed to, here's your choice. You can go to Newcastle, you can go to Muscatatuck, or you can go to this group home in Densens, and you happen to live in Covington. Those are your choices. Not today. You can build something creative. I'll tell you one story. I don't know if you remember Jimmy. Jimmy was 50 years old. Everybody called him Jimmy. Supposedly the toughest guy at Newcastle. Happened to be from Attica, from your area.
I'm not shocked.
Mom was in her late 70s, and she said, what if we could put him in a house right next to our house? And he could live right next to me. His one brother is just on the farm down the road. And the team came together and said, let's make that happen. And he moved back. They ended up moving a manufactured house in there. So he was right next door to his mom. They made it work. They had staffing that came in. His brother became one of his staff to help support that. But it was that creativity that led to, how do we build a Medicaid waiver that allows that sort of creativity for the future? And that's gotten us to where that one first meeting that we can do better changed the whole future for Indiana.
But also being under a strict deadline and being forced to figure it out and then being successful at it was such a great model for the rest of the system. I mean, it didn't make the rest of it easy, but there was a method then to follow. And there were families to talk to other families. That first meeting in the gym, so that families had made a pretty difficult decision once to send their loved one to Newcastle, especially if it was far away. And it was heart-wrenching. And the idea that they were going to have to do that again. And excuse me, here was the government saying, but we can do it better now, and a lot of skepticism. But then immediately, as the providers stepped in and made visible what the alternatives were going to be like, it really had great momentum. And I think that's why it was able to get done so fast.
Well, the state made some incredible changes. So when they recruited these providers, they had to sign an agreement that say, okay, Tabitha, you're going to agree to take people from Newcastle. Once you take them, you can't give up on them.
Right.
Because every one of these families had stories, horrible stories of being kicked out of every program they'd ever been in. And so we said, if you sign up, you're going to do whatever it takes. And the state said, we're going to come up with a budget. And if we find out it isn't enough, we will supplement that budget for 6 months and help you figure this out. And we'll bring consultants in to do this. And, supposedly we had this one ward with some of the most difficult people. that they said couldn't be served in the community. And we brought two of our self-advocates over, Betty Williams and Darkus Nibbs, two young women with disabilities themselves. And they said, we want to go up on that ward. And the staff said, no, it's too dangerous. These people are dangerous. So they won't hurt us. So here is this, young African-American woman, this young woman from the south side of Indianapolis, and who were determined to go upstairs. And they came back 4 hours later. So there's nothing wrong with those guys out there. They just wanted to have people listen to them.
Yeah.
And they kept in touch. Sadly, both Darkus and Betty had passed away. But they kept in touch with people that moved out. And it was when we started listening to people as opposed to labeling them. And that's, again, where we started building a system that was designed to be more person-centered, something we haven't completely solved by any means.
Yeah.
Begin looking at how do we put people more in charge of what they want in their lives, asking them questions as opposed to...
And work from their strengths.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, seek that out and engage with what's going to get somebody engaged and how powerful that is, and how people respond to that so beautifully, as we all know that we do.
Well, I think diversity in all senses really is our superpower. And I think that's what's being lost right now is, I have 3 little kids that have autism. One of them is non-speaking. And he's got this one therapist at ABA right now that has really unlocked him. And he's like running towards
so
improvement.
great.
I know, it's amazing.
So
He has an AAC device, which we're still learning how to use. But before, if he'd get frustrated, he'd cry and come and try and lead you around, point at things and all that. Still doing that. Now he's advocating for himself more. He's using more language, which, I say non-speaking because we spoke about that earlier. We're not quite sure what that will look like in the future, but like giving the AAC device now, teaching how to use it, hopefully he can use it, and then it will encourage him, if he has language in him that he wants to use, that later on he can do that. And so now what I'm seeing is from his AAC device as well as his individual tablet, he's like a little genius when it comes to YouTube and all these things.
How old is he?
He'll be 4 August.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's little.
So he's gone from when all this process started, he's gone from like when he was in first steps and all that. Wouldn't make eye contact, twirl around, anything that was long he wouldn't spoon, things like that. He'd just twirl and twirl and twirl. Wouldn't engage with his siblings, wouldn't play with other kids. Just not a lot of socialization. I was encouraging it, but for whatever reason, he just wasn't taking it. And then you put him in front of the right type of people, which I'm one person and I'm outnumbered. So I'll admit that right from the get-go. I was like, you need more hands with these kids. And the more good hands that you have with these kids that really genuinely care, not just kids, but adults, as we've seen, makes all the difference in the world. And sometimes it might just be that one thing or that one person, and then you unlock this person. And, all of these people that others would see as not worthy or insignificant or whatnot, you'd be surprised when you get them back in a community how they actually contribute to that community. Absolutely. And lift others up.
And the thing that you both touched on is so important that, when I was first trained in this field in 73, we always looked at deficits. How do we fix people? As opposed to what are their strengths? And now we are building on this strength-based model of figuring out what are the strengths that people have and how do we build on that and how do we make them part of the community, not a part from it. And you can be as institutionalized on a Medicaid waiver as you were in Newcastle. If you're stuck in an apartment and nobody ever sees you and you never get out. But the idea of how do we find what really people love, what do they want to do, and then how do we build on it? It doesn't always cost money.
Right.
How do we find that strength? I was talking to a dad the other day that, with our company Quilla, we tell stories and designed to be positive and exploring with folks. And so there's this dad that told me a story out of Pittsburgh. And his son had always said, when he went to his annual team meeting about a job, they want to get him a job. And he said, I want to be president of Starbucks. He's on the spectrum. He never worked a day in his life. He said, I want to be president of Starbucks. And everybody laughed. Next year they came around and said, what do you want to do for a job? I want to be president of Starbucks. Everybody laughed. Nothing happened. Third year, there's a new member of the team. And he said, I want to be the president of Starbucks. And the guy says, well, you know, that's a good goal. But usually you got to start at the bottom and work yourself up.
Yeah.
And he said, would you want to work at a Starbucks? And he said, I don't like people. I don't want to be around a lot of people. He said, well, you know, we have a Starbucks distribution center. And they need somebody that's really good with details. Mm-hmm. Dad told me this young man also has OCD, as well as his autism. Mm-hmm. And they said,
so man, can he do detail?
He can do detail. And they said he has to get these pallets ready to go for each store, make sure it's all right, everything's in there, and then it's sealed up. Mm-hmm. And they got him a job at Starbucks. And he loved it. Mm-hmm. He's got a Starbucks uniform, he works in the distribution center. A couple years later, guess who's walking through the warehouse?
The president
of Starbucks. And this young man walks up to him and says,
I want your job.
I want your job one day. And it was Schultz, you know, the guy that started this whole thing. He laughed and he said, I like to see that in my employees. I love that spirit. I hope it's not today because I got some things I want to get done. But somebody looked at him and said, here's a drive that I have. And how do we turn that in the right way? Of figuring out what's possible instead of telling people what's impossible.
Yeah.
And the thing that we've got is our challenge now. I think in this time where our Indiana legislature is talking about cuts that they have to make to Medicaid. And, you know, Medicaid, most legislators don't understand its impact on what it does in everyday life. It's 95% of the community-based services we do for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are funded by Medicaid. Mm-hmm. And we went that route to take advantage of federal funding. Mm-hmm. That was a conscious choice Indiana made. Mm-hmm. And it's worked. That's how we got to nearly 50,000 people. Yeah. And the idea now that the state's looking at cutting back Medicaid, because they say it's not sustainable, or that now the Congress, the president, are looking at historic nearly 20% cuts in Medicaid over the next 10 years. What does that mean to people? You know this as a parent. When you first have kids, you think, God, here's what the future might be.
Yeah.
And you have hope for them. And then some learn at birth. They have a child with Down syndrome, or in a few cases you identify something right away. Or you 2.5, you learn there may be autism or something else going on. And then you have to recalibrate. And you have to find hope. You have to find, okay, there is hope. It may not be what I thought, but there's hope for a life that's a good life. And that's where, again, you find some resources. And those resources are all built around hope, whether it's after-school care, a good school program, a waiver, a job, a place to live, maybe finding a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or both. You know, finding out, how do I have a life for my son or daughter that they're happy with? And then when people start talking about cutting budgets, it's not that we're just trying to be frugal. You're destroying that hope in people.
Yeah.
So how do we balance that? That there are things that we need to do. How do we do the next round of great innovation? That it isn't about just cutting budgets. We could have closed those state hospitals. We could have closed, I mean, we had this conversation in 97. We could have closed Newcastle in 30 days.
Sure.
We could have put them on buses to Muscatatuck, Fort Wayne State Hospital, the other places that we had, and said, it's closed.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Call it a day.
Yeah. And it would have been worse. It would have, we learned that the institutional model didn't work. And so we chose the hard path, said we're going to do it better. Right now we're faced with this chance. We have to enlist people how we're going to do it better. And how do we put families like you in control of the resources so that you build that good life for your 3 kids. And we look at it as an investment for their future. That is not a cost. But if we spend a little money right now building that good life, they're going to find those special powers that they have. So he's interested in technology now. We have young adults with autism who are doing coding, that are doing work with computers that we never thought possible. So it's finding those things. Your son may be the one that designs how AI really turns around the world for students with disabilities. And how does that turn into something very different? That's what we're at this point, where we'll either just cut back and say no to you, or we'll reinvent where we're going and where we need to be.
Well, I think Indiana is an interesting model for that, because you have a lot of people that have been here for a very long time, that are from like pioneering families, indigenous backgrounds, that, really embrace that 7 generations model, which is essentially, look 7 generations into the future, and hopefully there will be something worth having for those children then. I think it's important to have these type of conversations and, playing to people's strengths. You have really gritty people in Indiana, especially the moms, a lot of them starting nonprofits and things like that, that are now watching the government, not just Indiana, but the federal government, and saying, listen, we can solve these things. And if you guys aren't going to do it, we're going to start. So the government needs to start to get on board and to pay attention to what is going on around them, because you have plenty of people state by state that are already running organizations, that are already starting these models, much like what you guys did, that are putting in the work, that are proof that things are worth doing, that you can do things. And you combine a bunch of these people, more heads are better than one. And if people actually start listening, and especially people like you, that's why I think it's so important that you come on board, because you guys can speak from the past. And right now, if you don't know your past, you're damned to repeat it.
Right.
And I think we're just staring that in the face.
Well, we do have people that are advocating for a return to large congregate housing. Congregate meaning we put a lot of people in one building, and then somehow that's better as well. But something you said is so true. Through our history of social change in this country, it is all risen up from the bottom. And then leaders at the top recognize the need for change, and then how do we change our systems to make that happen? We're in this crazy time right now that, for example, once your 3 kids get on the waiver and they Medicaid, we just passed a law in Congress, and this big beautiful bill, that right now every year they have to go through recertification to say they still have autism, they still have a disability. We're now going to make people do that every 6 months. We doubled the amount of workload. So just think of Indiana, 50,000 people. We're recertified once a year. We have a team of people that work for the state that do that, 50,000 people. They're understaffed, it's a hard job because they have to do a lot of paperwork. Without increasing the resources they have, they're now going to do that twice. So you're going to go to your doctor, you're going to have 3 different doctor's appointments for your 3 kids to sign paperwork, pay your doctor to sign that paperwork, that they still have autism, they still have a disability, and we're going to submit that twice now during the course of the year. That's not really to prove that they still have autism. It really isn't, because we know that. I mean, they know they don't change. People are scamming the system claiming they have a disability. So
people, that is also a problem right now. You have a lot of people right now that are diagnosed about other things as well, but let's just talk about autism, that they've been diagnosed and they find out maybe, their parents. I'm a perfect example of that. My children were diagnosed. I saw some things in them that I was like, I think I did that. I found out that I had passed on a genetic variant to 2 of my children. Then I decided to get tested at 41. So think about the multi-generations of families that have something that are playing into this system as well. And so now people are backing out of the testing because of all the registries, and they're like, well, hold on a second. We don't want to be involved in this, but it doesn't mean that they don't have autism.
Correct. And just because you have a diagnosis of autism doesn't mean you qualify for Medicaid waiver service, because the disability is not significant enough to keep you from working, to keep you having a life that you're doing. So not everyone who's diagnosed with autism. And again, I found very few people that have tried to, over my own time, that have wanted to scam the system to get on the waiver, because it's hard to do. It's hard to do that. It's one of the controversies now as we look at autism of, this question of what does it mean? And I can talk from a person I'm very, very close to, who is, as much as you, late in life, discovered that she is on the spectrum. And she asked me, she said, should I really embrace this, or what should this mean to you? And I said, well, it's like the color of your hair. It's not who you are. It's just one descriptor of you.
Yeah.
And so as we look at this, I can see why people are scared, because this whole idea of the registry is insane.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. And we have a current leader in the secretary now who is just putting out false information. Thimerosal does not cause autism. If it did, every kid would have autism, but it doesn't. So I mean, they're propagating a hoax around vaccines, which is really unfortunate. But it takes away from the real issue of how do we help people have a good life.
Yeah.
A diagnosis of autism is not an end of life diagnosis. It changes your trajectory. A young man, and this is a delightful young man, I'm in Indianapolis, and he had this great line, and he said, you know, I learned, and he went from being in a self-contained class to graduating from high school, going to college, studying animal husbandry in a small program college in Vermont. And he's now back home, has a job with a goal of getting out of the zoo. And that's his goal, he wants to work with animals at the zoo. And one day he's going to happen. So Drew was talking to me one day, and I was talking to him about his experience going away to college. And he said, you know, I learned that I have autism, and they say it's an arc, you know what? It's kind of like this half circle. And he said there was such clarity, and he said, you know, if I'm on that half circle, I'm about right here. He decided it was, and he said, it's like my brown hair. It's just part of who I am. And everybody had denied him his opportunity. He now lives on his own. He's got a job. He's got a goal. He eventually wants to move to Alaska.
Good.
So his parents embrace that and start saying, what do we do about that? So how do we as systems, he doesn't need a lot of help. He may need a little help. We may have somebody else who needs a whole lot of help.
Yeah.
Or they need a whole lot of help for a short period of time. And we figure that out. And we figure out how to design systems that work, that are affordable, that are manageable, and then begin looking at what do we do. We don't solve that by making people do paperwork twice a year. The whole reason for doing that is we're making it hard for people and they drop out of the program. It's not about verifying that your son still has autism. So if we make it difficult enough, then people will drop out. And we didn't cut the program, they just dropped out.
Right.
So these are the kinds of challenges. Something you talked about earlier on, I don't know if Kathy came in this, because there is a grittiness about Indiana, that if we empower people to figure out new solutions, and government figures out a way how to get it out of the way, still keep it accountable, still spend money appropriately, people will come up with great solutions. But we've got to make sure it works. And how do we support them in doing that? And that greediness is what's gotten us here. And it's largely driven by women. And dads are getting more involved. But they're finding solutions. And how do we make those work for folks?
Well, I think Indiana, I mean, I might be a little bit of a unicorn. Maybe I'm not. I hope I'm not. I hope there are more people out there like me. But I'm very much like, who says I can't? And hell no, no I won't. And I seem to hear that in a lot more women and a lot more parents, that they're like, you know what? I disagree with you. I disagree with you, and I think I'm gonna hold your feet to the fire. And then once that process starts, then it's just a matter of how far down that path are you gonna go. And that's why we say when people come on, you know, advocacy is in the name for a reason. We can go as light or as hard as you want, but don't come on this show if you don't want to be an advocate. And all of us should be advocates, because autism or disabilities in some way touches everyone's life. You know, there are people that are in your family, in your community, people that you work with. Like, all these people are Americans, and even if they are Americans, even if they're guests on your soil, like, why wouldn't you want them to have the best experience possible? Like, if if you are a true American, if you really embrace that, if you embrace the grittiness of, being an Indiana Hoosier and getting it done and being from the country and all these things, like, that's the backbone of who we are. Why wouldn't we want to do these things?
It's so right. And in all my years, I got kicked out of every governor's office except Franklin Bannon's.
That's probably a good sign you're doing something right.
And Joe Kernan's. I would say those two of all those. But we had to make first step, start 5 years kids. One of the proudest things we did for me. First step originally wasn't entitlement. Mm-hmm. And he had to opt in, and we had to make it an entitlement to provide that 0 to 3 experience. And I remember being challenged and kicked out of the office eventually by the governor's office. They said, well, this is the first step to a tax increase. That's all you're doing here. You're just creating another tax entitlement here. Mm-hmm. Well, we ended up getting it passed anyway. And years later, that person had a grandson with a disability. Mm-hmm. And we were at a dinner together, just happened to, by accident, be sitting at their table. And somebody I respected and liked to this day. And she said, I do owe you a little bit of an apology of what I said to you back then. And I'm glad we did it, and you lead us on it. So the thing that we should be thinking about on the systems is, it shouldn't take somebody in your own family. Mm-hmm. We had a congressman that never supported anything we did. Mm-hmm. Won't mention any names.
Sure.
He fought against, you used to have a right to move a group home into a neighborhood. And the Supreme Court changed that and said, no, they have a right to be there. Mm-hmm. He fought that law here in Marion County. He fought it to the death. We beat him. Mm-hmm. But he didn't want a group home to move into a neighborhood. There were no waivers at that time. Mm-hmm. He later on had a grandson with autism. Changed his whole life. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't have to experience it. Sometimes people do. You shouldn't have to experience that to have compassion. Again, that was the great thing, I think, with Franklin Bannon. And I don't know if there was any family members that he and Judy had, or they had known people, of course, that known people with disabilities. But he had this absolute compassion for what needed to happen for people. And he didn't have to experience it. His family knew it was the right thing to do. And we've had other governors that have done that. So we've got to find a way to build that up and support it. And we've also got to find a way to get out of this incredible polarization that we're in right now, that just because you have an idea and you come from one side or the other, it's bad.
Well, Timothy, you talked about the value of advocacy. I just want to echo that. I think that everybody's willingness to talk to the General Assembly or whomever about the changes in their life, the positive changes that have come from an empowering approach is very powerful. And I think it would also be very important, it continues to be very important, that we have enough information about what we get from our investments in people to be able to build the case for those kinds of investments in our system, because right now we're going the other way. Mm-hmm. And I think the cost to all of us of people living under a high level of constant stress and what that does to them, and how that would compare against living in a way where people feel free and empowered and enabled. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very stark comparison. It's a hard one to build because it's hard to pinpoint what comes from a particular investment, but I think it's worth all of our efforts to build that case and make that case, and to tell the individual stories of people, that those who have the power to make a change that they know and that they can relate to.
That's so true, Kathy. Thank you. I said that advocacy can happen if you go to church with somebody, with a legislator. Mm-hmm. It's where you meet them and talk to them and share with them your story. One of our greatest advocates was a guy who ended up saying we started off the legislature as part of the Tea Party movement, said we should get out of the Medicaid program. Mm-hmm. He says too much re-rule. Again, it comes to 95% of what we do in Indiana. Mm-hmm. And he was a home builder. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, couldn't we get rid of all those rules and just run it ourselves and be cheaper? And I said, yeah, we probably could, but we get 63 cents out of every dollar. How much efficiency could you save if you had no rules in home building? Could you build a house for 37 cents on the dollar for what you do now?
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned, because we were talking about that article. Let me get to my notes here because I'm not going to remember. Indianapolis Capital Chronicle, Kim Dodson.
Yes,
She's the current
executive
CEO,
director of the
right?
ARC. Yep.
Okay, so let me get there real fast. She was talking about the Medicaid waiver, Home and Community-Based Services, HCBS, that started in 1981. And the cost of institutional care in 2007 was $233,600 per person, and now that cost will be $350,000
Easily, if not more.
And you have an average, like a median rate of income for like statewide, probably around $50,000 per family.
Yeah.
So if you think of those type of numbers, and that is per person, I guarantee you, if, irregardless, Republican, Independent, Democrat, whatever, if everyone is touched by autism or the disability community, which we know is a fact, in some fashion, it touches everyone's lives. And then you put these type of numbers, because, a lot of people in Indiana were like checkbook people, sitting down at the table, figuring the bills out. If you put that, like those stark numbers in front of people and say, right, you're making $50,000 for your entire family of four, you're figuring it out or whatever, and then we can't seem to figure it out. We now want to put people back in institutions that's going to cost $350,000. They're going to say you're crazy. And that doesn't matter. Like Democrat, Republican, Independent, every Hoosier, when they see numbers like that, are going to be like, that is insane. We can do better. Why aren't we doing better?
One of the things that Kathy did in one of the sessions we had in the family, he says, I think our cost at the time, there were about $200 some a day in Newcastle, which was underrepresented. So again, you add that up to 365 days, it's a lot of money.
Sure.
I remember you were in front of the group and said, they were kind of angry. He said, so if we handed you as the state of Indiana a check for $260,000, is Newcastle what you'd buy for your son?
Right.
And they said, well, no. Well, then, okay, let's pick out how we get them home closer to you. How could we use this money more wisely? And people responded to that.
Or just very base level. What could you do with that amount of money?
Yeah.
If someone said to me, with all the things that I'm doing, nonprofits and all this stuff, which is all on my dime, and I do it on purpose so I can kind of do what I want. Who knows what that will look like in the future? But if you take someone like that, like me, and say, what could you do with $350,000? Oh, I could teach a course on it.
Yeah.
And so every single person that's doing something that is significant could figure out a new system that then they could also teach other people.
Yeah.
You just have to give people the knowledge.
Well, and there's a range. And one of the things that Indiana did that came out of Kathy's work on the 317 task force was how do we give people what they need, but not give them the whole boat?
Sure.
So that you look at it as an investment. Some people need a lot. Maybe you just need a little right now, but you'll need a lot later on.
Right.
But how do you figure out to be able to get people to trust in our system, to use what you need and begin building it? I want to get back to advocacy. You mentioned Kim Dobson. Obviously, I spent 40 years with the ARC and worked with Kim for many years. But families are not alone. Families across Indiana are struggling with issues and across the country. And the ARC is a great resource for them. So please, as you look at this, look up the ARC of Indiana, find the Autism Society. We're developing new organizations all the time that are reaching people. You don't have to be alone. There's good sources of information. We now have active Down syndrome organizations. We have a Black Down syndrome organization. We have an Hispanic organization for families that have children with autism that speak Spanish. And they're in this fringe that they're worried even about talking about their kids in school. They may totally document it, and they're worried about being snatched up and their son or daughter not being able to explain what's going on and acting up. The next thing they know, they're in a detention center somewhere. So there's all this going on. We have to find a way to support one another and keep the focus on building a better Indiana. And that isn't by just cutting back and saying no to families like yours.
That's just something to be proud of. And, honestly, that's a large reason why I'm doing some of this stuff. because I was so irritated. I mean, angry, very, very angry. Because being from a family that's been in Indiana since it was Indian territory, I'm like, this isn't what we're about. Like all this hate and all this nonsense, like, why is it that we can't seem to find this central zone of, hey, we don't like where we're going. There's some central point for all of us. And I know everybody wants to say, oh, I don't want to talk about politics. Everything in life is political. Yeah. I also was raised in that environment that's like, hey, don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics. But now we've come to a point where we can't not do that. Like I have kids that their entire lives are going to be either hurt or they're going to be emboldened and have more freedom by the things we do. So that's why I'm doing this stuff now, because my kids are small. And I'm hoping by the time that they're 20, I don't know what life will look like for them then, but I hope there are more people like me and like you guys that are seeing the need, 7 generations from now. That's just 1 generation from me. But I want my kids to be able to live independently if they can, maybe have some type of partner if they choose, be independent, have a skill, be able to, be a true part of their community.
Right.
Not
have
just
a life.
Not just constantly brushed off like, that person. If we start all this of all the unwanted, which it seems like that's the direction we're going, we're basically cutting our own throats here. And if your goal is to make Indiana or the nation, the most prosperous, if you want to speak to more of the capitalistic side, let's talk to those people too. You have all these people now. You have all these skilled hands that there's a lot of jobs that other people don't want to do. Like maybe you might have that one autistic person that they're really efficient at cleaning toilets, and maybe they can create a business out of that because not everybody wants to clean toilets. Or maybe they like to do prep in a bakery. Not everybody wants to do that. There are all these people that have these refined skills, or maybe you can help them refine it. Same with women, people with disabilities, really? Women.
Kind of everybody, right? We're all looking how to channel what it is that we have into where it's going to be valued.
Yes.
And there's nothing, I can't imagine anything better for the economy than making those matches. And I think that's what happened at Newcastle. We figured out a process for matching people with their desired life, and then watched them blossom.
Playing to people's strengths.
And that's what productivity comes from.
Sure.
And that applies certainly to people with disabilities, but in many ways to all of us.
Of course.
And the value that we all bring when our situation empowers us.
Well, going back to World War II, for example, I am very much from one of those families that's like, get your hands dirty. And, from a farming community where the women did a lot of things, and they still do. Most of these households and these farms would not function without these women. So now having this whole recess of thought on what women should do, what people with disabilities should do. Maybe we should put people back in the household. Well, to what end? Are we going forward or are we going backward? And if we go backward, like you said, how is that making us prosperous by going backward? When we should be learning our lessons from the past, moving forward so that we're accelerating something positive.
Well, it's so interesting, and I really enjoyed listening to the two of you talk. There are so many things that are in our self-interest. Set aside the disability community for a second. No small source, the Wall Street Journal, has studied for years and looked at what do we need in population growth to achieve a growing economy. And we need a 2% population growth. We haven't hit that for the last 20 years. That's even with
don't we all have to have 2.6 children now in order to maintain
and that takes 20 years.
But we can't afford to have them because we don't have the support network for the mothers who are largely single mothers to have the children, to have the safety net.
I have 2 employees. We just cut child development block grants, and we just cut head start. So 2 young moms that work for me both had babies, one in July, one in October. The one in Minneapolis is spending $750 a week for childcare. Now her and her husband both work, they have only 1 child. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
The one here has a mother, the grandmother, and a sister that can help work out, and so they jumbled it together. But between all that, it's still a very significant amount just for childcare, so they can keep working. So all of these things are interrelated. But just on the question of growth, and yes, AI and advanced manufacturing lowers that somewhat, and even the Wall Street Journal says we still need about 1.75% growth to maintain a growing economy. We're at slightly below 1%. And so the idea, how are we going to make people more part of the work economy? If we don't provide support for you and your 3 kids to have a life of their own, it takes you out of that workforce.
That's right.
And we have families that have had to quit because they had to quit their job. Talked to a nurse the other day. She had to quit her job because her son kept getting sent home from school because he has autism. And she couldn't keep missing work. And the hospital called me up and said, what do we do to help her? We don't want to lose this nurse. And happened to know one of the people there in HR. How are we going to help her? Why are they kicking her kid out of school? Well, he's acting up because they're not following his behavior plan, they're not supporting him, right? All the reasons for doing it. So this idea of how do we, it's in our self-interest to have a growing economy, right? For everybody. Kathy convinced me to start reading economic and newspapers and feel fine, because I'm the touchy-feely guy that just told stories.
Sure.
And she's the scientist. The idea that we've got to make it work for everybody. It's like the old story about when we made ramps on buildings. We put a ramp so people in wheelchair can get into buildings. What do you find out? Everybody likes walking up the ramp instead of walking up
They have
the
a
steps.
stroller, or you're pulling a
easier.
suitcase, or something.
It's easier for everybody. And so the more we look at building on strengths, the more we're going to help kids coming out of school without disabilities find good careers, find the right path for themselves to do what they want to do. And it's not, somebody the other day, somebody in the new administration said, well, we need to go back to the day when people were proud to go to work for Ford and work there for 40 years. That's okay. And it is okay for some kids, but some kids in college, they don't want to do that. They want to do different things. They want to find meaning along the way. How do we find ways to do that? That's where we got to make our investments. And where I worry that we have families out there like yours. And this is where your podcast is so important. How do we bring them together in a broader community so that we harness that energy? How do we find that next creative idea? Where does it bubble up that says, here's what we're going to do that transcends our thinking right now?
I have a thought.
Good.
I have lots of thoughts, but I also like to read. And I also travel a lot. I don't know if you guys know this, but I was a flight attendant for 17 years.
No.
Yeah, I was a French speaker for a good portion of that. Traveled all over the world. I've lived in South Africa, Ireland, and France. And so I've had the opportunity to see how some other places do things. I've not lived in the like Scandinavian countries, but I'm a fan.
Yep.
I'm a fan of how Iceland does things. And these are models of how we can do better.
Yeah.
And so my thought, just on a very basic level, is if you have people around the world, even if it's international, why wouldn't you bring them in? If they have a system that's working, these are your experts. Why wouldn't you bring them in and ask them, how does this work? Like, maybe we have a larger scale. Maybe it won't work exactly the same. But we've got Canada next door, and they seem to be doing some great things. And it seems to me that if we could find any sort of a system to make healthcare actually accessible and to where people wouldn't risk losing their homes and all of this sort of thing, this is where your creativity gets unlocked. Because if people aren't beholden to a job for their health insurance because, if we don't stay here, then my kid can't go to school or this, that, or the other thing, that's like the magic example. I'm not quite sure what that would look like for the US. I realize, we're a larger template than, some other countries, but people are doing these things and these things are working. So get all of our genius brains together all over the world and start pulling people in that are doing good things and say, hey, how do you do this?
And want to do it, right?
And wanna do
And
it.
sort of restore our faith and our hope in the common good and the value of the common good, because you have to want that for people.
Right.
And it was hard enough when we all wanted it and didn't know how to do it. Now we have to make sure that we still want it. We have to ask our leaders, do we believe that empowering everybody is the way we want to go? And here's the evidence that supports going that way. I think if we can get back to that, you're exactly right. We can find a system.
You know, I was always a big fan of Teddy Roosevelt. You know, about everything he did was great, but I was a fan just in general. And I think we need to get back as a civilian portion of society that demands answers and demands action. And it's no longer acceptable for people to just squawk and tell us things. You know, we need to largely become a populace again that demands things from their leaders. And I think we're starting to see that. It is controversial for some people, but I personally believe if you dig, it's not even that far back. I mean, we're a fairly young country. If you open a history book and then you start to look at some of these leaders and some of these presidents, you know, like Teddy Roosevelt was all about women's rights and, you know, supporting the suffragist movement and all these things. You know, I think it's important to teach our children that standing up means something and that we need to hold our leaders accountable and that our government needs to work for us. And it may be broken, but we can fix it. It's not impossible.
We also need to celebrate the successes we're having.
Of course.
Because we have more people with disabilities working today. We have more people married today, living successfully. We interviewed a young guy. He and his wife have been married now 9 years. Young guy, they're in their 50s. And, you know, the interviewer was saying, well, what's a successful long marriage? You guys have been married 12 years. He said, well, I've learned that on day one, my wife is right. On day two, she's right again. On day three, I was wrong. And we get along just great. But, you know, he was just joking about it, and she laughed. She said, I'm not always right, just most of the time. But the idea that we have come so far.
Yeah.
We can't go back.
No.
We can't go back to pulling people into large buildings and ignoring them, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
I remember a dear friend, Betty Cochran, the Kathy I had, she's no longer with us. She remembered every day that her sister Patty, in the 1950s, 60s, Patty was struggling, and all the doctors said, put Patty, Betty's sister, into a state institution in Fort Wayne. And forget you ever had her. Take care of raising your other kids. And Betty talked about that day that her mom and dad loaded Patty up. Betty had no idea where she was going, or that she was being placed there. And they drove to Fort Wayne State School. That's what we called it at the time. And she talked about how they left her there. And her mom got 2 miles down the road and said, we're going back. Went and got her. And said, we're going to build something different. This isn't right. And that's where we're at. So how do we have certain economic realities we got to deal with.
Of course.
No question. But we can build on those successes. Your son that has all that interest in technology, how do we turn that into, maybe down the road, he wants to go to Rose Holland.
I don't know.
Get a degree in computer science and engineering that ties into that.
Well, speaking about hope, like you said, you know, if we can build some basin, I mean, I don't think people are looking for miracles at this point. Just a baseline, some sort of a baseline that they can rely on that says, hey, I can believe in hope and I can project that maybe my child could do this in 20 years.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing, there's some great research out of Vanderbilt University, a guy named Eric Carter, talks about where do you get hope and where do you get high expectations? And it comes from positive encouragement from those closest to you. Starting with family, starting with those people closest to you in your community, that it's not telling you the worst case of what's going to happen. But here's some good news. Here's some things to think about. Here's somebody that's working at Starbucks. Here's somebody that now there's a DJ in New York City with Down syndrome that I'm sure makes more money than all of us combined. Probably.
I think that's great.
So the idea that that's not right for everybody, but what is it that does work for you? Compare that. You mentioned about cleaning restrooms. Young woman I know, and her first job was cleaning restrooms, and she didn't like it.
Sure.
She found a better job.
Yeah.
And her job coach says, well, you can't quit this bathroom cleaning job because it's going to look bad on your resume. And she said, I make more money, I don't have to clean bathrooms, and it's a job I like more. I'm quitting. Well, look bad on your resume. That wasn't building on her strengths. She got the new job, and now she's grown with that. And she's
Now her resume looks really good.
Looks really good, yeah.
See, now I think just for normal people, just anyone, right? Like, it is so debilitating. And if you want to talk about health, right, and burdens to our healthcare system, if you have someone that is not doing well, that hates their job, it's not fulfilling,
Right.
they're going to have health problems. And we don't even address sufficiently like our real mental health crisis in the U.S. That's another thing that we just kind of, let's not talk about.
Well, there's a whole growing understanding too that people with intellectual disabilities, people with autism, people with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, have never been identified as having mental health needs. You have Down syndrome, you're always happy. Well, not necessarily. You can be depressed like anybody else.
Yeah.
And then finding somebody to help you with that. You know, the key as we look at this, and this is where we help folks and professionals and people in government, is David Mack, who helped us a great deal in the closure process. He's now retired in New Hampshire, and he did a series of videos for us. And he talks about one of his early people, and this is for anybody in government or in schools or in work programs. And he said, so that there's two ways you can be wrong. You can have expectations too high for somebody, and they may fail. Or you may have expectations too low, and they never achieve any of them. Because you never set the expectations high enough. And what he said, if there's a 50-50 chance you're going to be wrong, why don't we make the chance up? We're going to expect more. And let's try to create that. Young man that wanted, after months of talking about why he hadn't gotten the job, and they kept talking about all his skills. They looked at him, and if we looked at Kathy and all their skills and said, here's all the things you can do. Finally, after about an hour of talking to him, he said, I can do any of those jobs, I just don't want to. I want to work, but I want to work with nice people who don't judge me for having autism.
That's a big one.
There's the key, right? And they said, why hadn't you told us that before? Well, you never asked me. You never let me. You kept telling me all these things I could do in this job, and this job, and this job. He said, I want to work with good people.
And, I think there's a deeper root of that, because I also very much feel that way. I've had several bosses. And now that I know that I have autism, I always struggled with anxiety. And apparently those go hand in hand. You have, a problem with business management and how they teach managers as well when you get to production where the person doesn't matter anymore. And they're missing the line there as well, because sometimes it's as simple as asking someone, hey, are you doing okay? Do you need something? You can improve that productivity in that person like tenfold if they know that you care, if there are some type of resources. So if we're always going back to how we can produce, well, what is your minimal investment in that person that is actually effective? Not just how much they can produce, because if you stress them out to the point where then they can't produce, then they're no longer beneficial to your organization. So if you could just give them a little bit of resources so that they can get back to being productive, why wouldn't you do that?
And they might have some good ideas about how to change how the work is organized anyway,
Right.
in order for everybody to be more productive and
Right.
feel good about being able to contribute that.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting when you talked about your family being Indian, since this was Indian country. I grew up on a reservation in South Dakota. I'm not native.
Okay.
My dad got a job with the tribe, and so that's how we got there. But the 10 poorest counties in America are all Indian reservations.
I believe that.
And, but there's a growing movement there about taking care of their own folks and figuring out how to do it. And it isn't always people from the outside telling them what to do. So again, there's things that we have to learn and figure out that if we can make it there, work on Pine Ridge, Rosebud, that we'll figure it out for the rest of the country. And so the answer isn't to just say no. The answer is to say how. And how do we figure out how to make it work? And I think that becomes the key.
Because no one knows the land better than the indigenous people that were here.
And the people that are living that experience right now, whatever that experience is,
Sure.
you know what it's like to have 3 kids identified as being on the spectrum. And we all have unique experiences along the way. The mom that's scared, she's adopted 2 kids from Guatemala, and she's a doctor. And she is scared to death they're going to be snatched up.
Right.
And what happens to them? Because they don't even get a phone call to say, call your mother. And neither of those kids have any disabilities right now. And she's scared to death. So they all walk around with this envelope in their purses that has their birth certificate, their information, and here's what to do with this and they're here, they're documented, they're fully naturalized citizens. So you've been thinking about what that stress does to her as a mom. And Kathy mentioned earlier this book, Weathering, which she turned me onto. It's an amazing book as we look at how we solve healthcare issues and the things that we put people in distress over on that. And, I just feel we could go on forever, but I want to share with you.
We'll go as long as you guys want to.
Well,
and you can always come back if you like this experience.
Well, enjoy what you're doing so much. But I just want to share this. We had a very wise old man on the res, and he claimed to be 105 years old. He was there at the Little Bighorn, if you believed him. I believed him. Didn't have any reason not to. Anyway, there was a group of kids one day that were deciding we were going to fool them. He was a very wise man. Everybody respected him. And so there was this group of 3 kids, and they said, well, we're going to trick him. Prove out that we're smarter than he is. And he said, well, how are we going to do that? He said, well, we're going to go catch a bird. And we're going to take that bird and put it in our hands. And then we're going to walk up to, everybody called him Uncle Paul, or Grandpa Paul, and walk up to him and say, Grandpa, what do we have in our hands? And he said, if he's wise enough to guess it's a bird, we'll say, but is it a live bird or is it a dead bird? And if he guesses it's a dead bird, we're going to open our hands and the bird flies away. And we say, oh, you're wrong. And if he guesses it's a live bird, we'll squish it and open our hands and it's a dead bird. Either way, we get fooled and then laugh at it. So, of course, they found the bird, little sparrow, go walking up to Grandpa Paul and hand this out to him. And he said, Grandpa, what do we have in our hands? And he saw a little brown feather. He says, my sons, you got a bird in your hands. And they leaned back there all excited. I says, yes, but is it a live bird or is it a dead bird? And he leans back in his rocking chair and he said, my sons, that's completely in your hands. What we're at right now is this pivotal point in history. I truly don't believe that's hyperbole. We're at this critical point where our country decides what we're going to be. We're going to try to be better. We're going to improve the lives of people, or we're going to be self-centered and improve the lives of some people and let everybody else fall off the wagon. And I think it's your listeners, people who care about our future, care about our communities, about our neighbors, are going to have to realize it's in our hands. We've got to start acting. We've got to start being part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Right.
And that's our challenge, whether it's around talking about people with disabilities or our greater community or our country of where we're going to go. I do a lot of work in Canada right now. They're not too interested in working with us here.
Yeah.
They used to all come to here on vacation. They're not coming here anymore.
I have a lot of good friends in Canada, and actually, my buddy Ted, he's the one that helps me out with the podcast. He's Canadian, and so I anticipate things getting a little bumpy, And so I make sure that he always has copies of all my stuff. And I'm like, look, if there ever comes a point where things get a little too rocky and something bad happens, you just go ahead and keep publishing.
Well, you're doing great work, and thank you for doing this. Thank you for having us on here. It's always great to spend time with Kathy, and meet a new friend. And whatever we can do to help you get the word about your podcast and your work, would love to do that. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
You're
guys.
here.
I appreciate it. I feel like we've just been taking up all the time, Kathy. You need to tell us some more. What are you into right now?
Well, for a long time, I've been working with a simulation technology called the Reference World Information and Simulation Environment. And it works with Daniel Kahneman's theory of subjective well-being. And essentially, it's like SimCity built out of real data, and allows us to look at what-if scenarios of just the kinds of things that we're talking about, and helps us understand the value of well-being and boosting well-being and how that helps all of us. So I continue to do that. I spent most of my career in state and local government, and pretty much retired from that. And then I serve on a number of not-for-profit boards. I'm currently the chair of the board of the Indianapolis Foundation, which is grappling with just these questions about how do you build a community where there is economic opportunity for all, and how do we bring everything together in order to stimulate that. And then on a few other not-for-profit boards.
Are there any other the nonprofits that you'd like to speak about a little bit?
Well, we do have our Let's Stop Weathering group, which is looking at the outcomes, the health outcomes for people who live under constant stress. And I think the social determinants of health is a concept that's been around for a long time, that says our health is much less a result of our healthcare system and much more a result of our life. And I think this takes that research a little bit further and really draws a line between those of us who live under a constant, extraordinary level of stress and the kind of health outcomes. And there, the number one cause of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, maternal and infant death. So very, very serious health outcomes from the kinds of stresses that you're talking about. And then I work with an organization that works with Crystal House International, which is schools around the world for the poorest kids, giving them full service, supporting their families, engaging their families, coaching them even after high school, 4 years through college, and really helping people who need it the most build a very successful life in many countries around the world.
That's great. Well, I think you guys should send me all your links to all the books that you want myself and all the listeners to read that you think would be helpful, any organizations that you think would be helpful, because I think, those that care right now about trying to spend their money in good places are interested, and maybe they don't have lists of things. Right. So I'm also working on some other little side projects, but just diverse ways to put your money in places that are run by good people doing good things that you think maybe have some longevity, or maybe you just really believe in their moral compass.
Very good. Thank you. That's a great offer.
Yeah. So you guys get me all the links and I'll plug them in.
We'll do it. And keep this up. You're doing great work.
Well, thank you.
And it's exciting to see the next generation of leaders coming up and being disruptive to the process.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you so much. I do it because I feel like if I don't, my kids might not have a shot. And I think any parent or grandparent, that's the goal, right? Like we just want to create a space and an environment where they can do the things that we did.
I interviewed this lady who was actually a founder at one down in Bloomington that started that first school. She couldn't do the first school. And it was her. She was at the dentist, and notice this is 1943 during the war, that she was at the dentist, and the lady had a picture. She was the wife of the dentist, had a picture of the two of them and their daughter who had Down syndrome. She had a daughter with Down syndrome. And she decided to be bold and said, what a beautiful family. And the little lady perked up. And that was two women got together and said, we need a school. You're starting things, the ripples of which will carry far beyond the things that you imagined today. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you guys coming down, and I loved having this conversation. Hopefully you guys will come back again.
Anytime.
Thanks, Tabitha.
Thank you.
We are at a pivotal point in American history. We do not have the luxury to remain silent. Programs are disappearing every day. We hope that this podcast raises awareness and sparks a sense of advocacy in you. We all can make a difference. The important thing is to start. See you next time.